ready to rock and roll. The new episode, we're going to try to discuss Pierre Poilievre's new leadership platform 2.0.
And quite frankly, I'm having difficulty finding out what that is. You know, I mean, you know, home run statements like reduce taxes, you know, freedom of the individual, blah blah blah. Right? That all sounds good.
All cliches with no meat in the matter. I
Well,
mean, come
the
on,
only
folks. Talk is cheap. It takes money to buy whiskey. Let's see some real policy and what you're planning to implement. And their big claim is, oh, well, if we put down policy, the liberals will steal it. Well, opposition is to give ideas to better the country. If they take it, we know where it came from. If they have no improvements to it, we know that you were great. So, no, that is wrong political idea as a leader of an opposition party. I prefer to see your policies. Who's with me on that? Comment, share, like, hit subscribe too. We want to see what the real platform is. I'm tired of axe the tax. Well, you put the tax in. Now you're saying axe the tax. Well, isn't that saying you're kind of stupid in the first place? So I'm getting tired of this hypocrisy with the conservative leader and leadership role. And the 2.0 leadership, he put in 20 new members to his council to set policies and design the campaign for the next election. So 2.0 is an appropriate number for Mr. Poilievre. He's trying to be the new and improved version of the previous version, which failed. You got any articles there that show some of his policy?
Well, the only one I can find that seems to be a certain is they want to defund the CBC,
Yeah, yeah.
and and of course, you know, one of the issues about the CBC is they cover a wide range of topics and issues that are not covered by the regular run-of-the-mill media, including, you know, native rights and women's rights and that sort of thing. Topics that most right-wing or centralist media really don't have much of an interest in, and the CBC will tackle those as well. The CBC is one of the few, if not the only, radio station that you can listen to that doesn't kill you with advertisements every, you know, screaming, mattress sales and, you know, car discounts. And so I really enjoy listening to the CBC on occasion where they do have at least an attempt to have intelligent conversations. And I can understand why the conservatives aren't interested.
Well, there was a lack of news coverage on the leadership review, and that was because I believe the conservatives did like Harper did, restricted the number of journalists into the meeting so that they could control the press coming out. And that's why we had trouble finding information about what was going on. It was controlled media by their supporting media cast and investors. And folks, it is an investment by the media of private ownership to promote those people that will give them the most return in money and profits to their corporations. Over in Europe, they ban that type of participation of media because it gives undue influence to the media corporations to promote who they want to win the election and get most favor from. And that's why I love CBC. CBC is run by us and is supposed to be non-biased. They are influenced because of the pressure to have them disbanded by the conservative movement. And so sometimes they do not report on stuff that they should be reporting, or report in means that is not copacetic to true journalism. But that's only because the conservatives continually want to remove it from the playing board, because it does give fair representation of events and usually outs them on their lies and gaslighting. And of course they want that silence so that you only get their platform. And that is not fair. That's not right. And in many countries over in Europe, they ban political advertising on media outlets because it is unfair to those voters that have bombardment of ads from the wealthy backing one or two people or parties. So in Canada, we do need the CBC. It is essential that we have fair representation of journalism because most of our few media owners are political in nature, just like in the US. So we have to make sure we change some of the laws. I'd like to see PP's plans to change the laws on media. That would be an interesting one. I think people would be willing to listen to his ideas of what he wants to do with media. What would happen if CBC was removed from the airways in Canada? Who would be providing the news? And would it be true journalism, folks? Or will we get more of Trumpism here? Because that's a very Trumpist policy, and the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre and Harper really wanted to control the media.
Well, one of the issues as well is the media is becoming more and more centralized, and with AI, the deep fakes are becoming more and more common. I see, statements on the internet that are unbelievable, and the fact that people can hijack a person's persona, represent them on the internet as making certain statements that are totally untrue, and not be found out, penalized, or having their podcast or whatever it is removed from the air. Like I don't know how you're going to control that if you don't have some insight to the media, such as the CBC.
Well, the other thing is over in Europe, they've now, I think Wales and a few other places have passed laws that politicians are not allowed to lie to the public. And that's important too, as journalism needs to report and hold accountable what's being said or done in the public and the actions of governments as well. So it's a big issue, and we don't see any policies by the leader of the opposition on these major upcoming factors because they tend to use them to exploit the ignorant and non-critical thinking of their supporters. So they use it to their advantage to suppress media and journalism. And I think that's in opposition of what true democracy is. So I've got some fundamental issues. I'd like to see what the Conservatives' real policies on those subjects are, because if they're dodging and hiding, that means they've got some bad news for you coming, or they're going to deceive you and put in policies that will be very detrimental to the government of Canada and favor the wealthy. And that's another issue, is that conservative movements always seem to feed the wealthy. And that means they're corporation backed. The money that the corporations and the wealthy give them means they're puppets on a string. So PP seems to be a puppet on a string, and I'll give you the news that I had a really hard time finding was who were these 20 new councillors or council members for the governing council of the Conservative Party. And that was really hard to find. And lo and behold, no surprise, most of the 20-person council was very politically active in lobbyist movements for big corporations. And that is dubious in its undertaking. Why would you put on your council 20 people that have connections to large corporations and did lobbying for those corporations to get benefit from the government? Big question, folks. And the PP 2.0 did that. A new 20-person council, an influential body that oversees the party's internal affairs, including nominations and election readiness, are recent or current corporate lobbyists. A breach analysis of lobby register records reveals. So that was an article by The Breach, which is sent out February 4th, 2026. And that pretty much sums it up, folks.
I like the way they put it. The party bills itself as a party of tradespeople, resource workers, and those laying the groundwork for future Canada's prosperity and success. However, when The Breach looked at the 20 councillors there, they claimed that it looks more like a party of CEOs, resource corporations, and those paving the way for profit hoarding and exploding inequality. Now,
Yeah.
one of the comments they have is they're going to spend more money on resource industries, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in 2024, the federal government blew almost $30 billion in subsidies to the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
How much more?
You don't hear that in Smith News or PP's News.
How much more? How much more money are the Conservatives going to, plow into oil and gas? And where are they going to get the money from if they cut the taxes? Now, you understand that, when they cut a percentage of the taxes off of a worker, it may amount to a case of beer a week, but that same percentage off the CEO who's making $5 million a year or $20 million a year, that's a new executive jet.
And that's the same with corporate taxes being lowered under conservative movement. I guess what I would like to point out to people is that this capitalist concept that capitalism is the greatest method for running governments in the world is a mythology, because capitalists are exploitive, rape and pillage, and greed. And they only become wealthy by ripping you off, period. All the money comes from you to them, whether they're providing a service or providing jobs or providing guidance. Their whole object is to line their pocket. And the reason we have governments in place, and this is since a long time ago, and they set up stock markets trying to control capitalists, everything else, the governments of the time have to regulate capitalists from the exploitation they want to do. And they want to rip everybody off. That's why this conservative movement, they're backing capitalists and providing corporate welfare to enrich the corporations, because they notoriously keep the minimum wage low. They want a workforce that is paid minimal amount so that their financiers, the capitalists, can make as much money as possible. And you see it here in Alberta, where the lowest minimum wage is in the richest province, and it forces people to have 2 or 3 jobs just to pay the bills. So that's the conservative movement, and that, folks, is hypocrisy when they're speaking that they're for the working class, when the reality is they're selling all our crown corporations and business to the CEOs and corporations, and especially foreign corporations that enrich them after they done with their political jobs. So I really have a hard time with that, folks, and I think every time you say, a crown corporation is the better way to go because it brings revenue to your government and lowers your taxes and pays you higher wages, the conservative movement always says, no, that's wrong. You get better jobs if we sell the crown corporation to private business, which because they bought the crown corporation, they increase the cost to you because they have to make the money back and make the shareholders rich, and then they get lower taxes on those profits, so you make less to the government and up go your personal taxes. That's not a good formula, folks. And you can use the Norway model just to show that in the oil industry and all the trillions we lost as a province and as a country. The money left and never comes back, which I guess we could go on and on about the conservative movement selling out of Canada to corporations, and that should transition into what is Poilievre's and the 20 lobbyists' policies dealing with tariffs with Trump.
Before you get into that, what you should do is look at. I think you're onto something when you're looking at the lobbyist list. It includes several strident anti-abortionists.
Yes.
People that want to restrict women's rights. Of course, the convention didn't even touch that. It has members of the council who are in big tech, telecommunications, pharmaceutical associations. They're lobbying for corporations like Loblaws, real estate development. A lot of them are aligned with the anti-abortion Christian fundamentalist movement. Now, these are people that are giving advice to a person who wants to become prime minister without publicly stating what it is that he would do when he becomes, or if he becomes prime minister. Obviously, with all these voices in his ear and having selected this particular group of people, they have an agenda, and the agenda is hidden. And that's
one agenda I'd like to point out is that we must remember that Epstein was convicted as being a pedophile and had a huge pedophile ring in the U.S. And Harper's government, of which PP was, what was he, staff, whatever they call it, and Kenny were actually high up on the government making policy, and they allowed Epstein to come into Canada. And while Epstein was here, he was recruiting for his sex trafficking ring. And these are what lobbyists of taking away women's rights shows that there's a link to this moral standing in the conservative movement. And you never hear much about that Harper let in a pedophile, known pedophile into the country, and the chief of staff, that's what Poilievre, also allowed it. So I can understand why PP doesn't want to go get a security clearance, because there's some legitimate background information or conduct that might influence that. And I find it dubious that we would even consider a leader of an opposition to refuse a security clearance when he has done and been involved in letting a pedophile come to Canada where he could recruit underage girls for his sex trafficking ring. And I'll tell you what, folks, Justin Trudeau's government refused Epstein's application to come to Canada. There's the difference in morals and ethics and protecting women's rights. And you see that the conservative movement, through having these lobbyists on their council, are not for protecting girls' and women's rights. And that seems to be a fact. Now, I'd like some comments on that, and some insiders to the conservative movement might want to correct us if we're wrong about the connections to allowing Epstein into Canada. I mean, if I was chief of staff, I would have advised Harper to make sure the pedophile didn't come to Canada to recruit our girls for a sex trafficking ring. That would have been a priority, and that never was done. So the morals and ethics are very important, and not getting security clearance tells me the morals and ethics of this 2.0 leader might be dubious.
And going back to lobbyists don't work for free. So somebody's paying for their services, and their services are to deliver the government to whoever's paying the lobbyists. So when you have to look at that and say, okay, now he's got these paid lobbyists sitting on a board of something to give advice to the Conservative Party, should they resign from their work as lobbyists so that they could at least say that whatever it is they're promoting for the benefit of Canada, not the benefit of Loblaws or Intel or General Dynamics, or they're promoting, the latest greatest Griffin fighter. Like, how does anybody know to trust these people when they're paid mouthpieces?
Well, you
Like,
got one guy as a lobbyist for a company that represents X, which is Elon Musk, and we know that Trump was saying that he wanted tens of billions of dollars from Canada to put the Golden Dome over Canada, and by having a lobbyist that is, best buddies with the military department under Trump, you got to question, is that meaning that we're going to be sold out to Trump in negotiations because of these people on the council advising that we better do Starlink over Canada versus the over-the-horizon technology that was provided by Australia for protecting the North to keep our sovereignty by not having U.S. equipment that could have hidden turn-off or counter surveillance abilities. So we got some real issues of morals and ethics going on if you are going to be prime minister in charge of our military, especially when we've been threatened war by the U.S., and yet your lobbyists seem to have the ability to cut deals as insiders to a new government under PP to endanger the sovereignty of Canada by these associations to military contractors, X, and other connections that seem to undermine the position of sovereignty for Canada. So we have to be very careful, folks, and I think it's time to do more research on these 20 people in the council of the conservative movement. There wasn't much press on it. They didn't want you knowing about it because it does lead to some very, very damning questions that could be asked. And if the evidence is provided on these people's backgrounds, we should be scared of these people having the ear of a future prime minister.
and for clarity, the news outlet that did this is breachmedia.ca. Breachmedia.ca. They seem to be one of the few that are interested in actually looking behind the curtain, to see who the Wizard of Oz really is. And I can tell you that it's the lobbyists. But anyways, one of the things that you have to worry about is these people are truly expressing the views of what the Conservative Party will do or will try to do in the event that they ever regain power, and the things that they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about women's rights, but they'll tell you that you have a right to refuse a COVID shot. You have a right to refuse to wear a mask. You've got a right to infect other people around you, but you don't have a right over other aspects of your body. You don't have the right, for example, if you're terminally ill, to end your life.
Some of these members have been lobbying for pharmaceutical companies and financial sectors. I mean, we talk about lowering the cost of medications and paying less for medication. If you're allowing these foreign entities to influence the pharmaceuticals, we're going to be paying higher costs for our medications so that these corporations can profit more. And that's the conservative movement, is to allow more profits to corporations because they believe capitalists are the best way to go, and they have no problem with corporate subsidization and corporate welfare. So it's going to be very costly for Canada if these lobbyists have their say in the ear of the next prime minister.
Think about it from another aspect too. You have somebody like Heather Fieldbosch, a former lobbyist for the Canadian Gas Association. Now, if you're sitting on this panel, board, whatever you want to call it, all of a sudden your billable hourly rate goes up. You're now sitting at the table of the opposition leader So you can now charge a little more for your lobbying.
Services, yeah.
Yeah. It's a great scam.
And that's the corruption style of the U.S. And I understand why Poilievre backed Trump, saying he liked Trump. I see why Smith got on her knees to Trump. They're all in the same marketing platform to usurp power from the government to enrich themselves, and their lobbyist group shows that. These lobbyists are enriching themselves without having to be public figures per se, and hiding behind Poilievre in the guidance to get more for their people that they lobby for. So we've got a problem here where accountability and credibility and news media should be uncovering all these links. Instead, you're hearing it from us. I'm glad that Breach Media was able to pull all this information, because I searched and searched high and low, and that's the only reference I've been able to find on what some of the people involved in this new 20-person council to the leader of the opposition were about. And it's not a positive light. It's showing the dirt and the underbelly of the Conservative Party, and that's probably why Poilievre was booted out of his last riding in the last election, is because after 20 years, they knew exactly all his connections. It just wasn't getting into the media because the journalists of these privately held corporations did not want to show the dirty underbelly of the conservative movement, because they stood to profit immensely by pushing in conservatives into Canada to line the corporate bottom line. And that's selling out Canadians, folks.
You'll get a kick out of this. The Conservative Party leader is an automatic member of the National Council, and he's expected to attend meetings, but he delegated his former campaign manager to represent him. I imagine the guy's a former campaign manager, because Poilievre was supposed to be a shoo-in against Trudeau, and they were already doing the victory speeches when they got blown out, by Carney. So that makes whoever in charge of that campaign the former, and the former campaign manager is now the stands in for the Conservative Party leader as the member of the National Council. He doesn't even want to sit in the meetings with these people.
Yeah. Well,
You're
at
going to delegate.
At the last convention in 2023 in Quebec City, some conservative members, probably the old progressive conservatives, had tried to organize around a grassroots resolution that would have barred lobbyists from serving on the council, and it failed. And no such resolution was put forward to this time. So that shows you that this undermining of the conservative movement has been going on for quite a while, and Poilievre was backing and wanting these lobbyists in place, or he would have in 2023 used his influence as leader to make sure that these lobbyists did not run and have their fingers on the Conservative Party. And that never happened, folks. So that's something you should take into consideration with the 2.0 Poilievre. He's going to be trying to cover up his past conduct and blaming Ottawa or blaming the Liberals or blaming the NDP for everything that's going on in the country.
Another interesting fact is the Conservatives are claiming that crime is up across Canada. And if you look at the crime statistics back to 1962, the number of violent crimes, property crimes, and other crimes has actually been falling, and is pretty flat between 2010 and 2022. Now, you would think that being tough on crime would also be in favor of a gun registry, because obviously violent crimes, for the most part, seem to be, it's guns involved. It's an awful lot harder to stab somebody to death than it is to shoot them. And of course, control, the argument that people kill guns don't kill people is ridiculous. Why wouldn't they be in favor of taking assault rifles off the street?
Well,
So
we went into that in our episode on assault rifles, and I recommend people go watch that one. And you probably have better defense in your house with pepper spray than you ever would with a rifle. So there are some real issues there, and I recommend people to share and comment on our assault rifle episode.
but my point is that the conservatives say one thing and then do another.
And
If they're really concerned about
hypocrisy.
the crime rates are going up, they get the guns off the street. But no, you have a right to own a gun. Continuing on with the Conservative Party plan for change, they say the number one plan is to cut the Liberal deficit by 70% with less spending on bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, and handouts to insiders and special interests, while boosting growth with revenue jobs. So, how are you going to stop the handouts when half of your board is lobbyists?
Well, it's just cheap talk. That's
Yes.
all that is, and it's talk without merit, and that's what I'm saying that the conservative grassroots movement is spitting out rhetoric that really has no meat to the matter, folks. We want to see policy. Write your policy out. If you can't write it out, how could you ever pass it for legislation? So there's the difference between intellect, critical thinking, and just bullshit being spouted to you to say the things that you want to hear. Every time a conservative government gets into government in Canada, it sets record spending, lowers corporate taxes, and increases our tax bill every year. And that's record. You can Google that. So this mythology that these people are the best managers of money is bullshit. They're capitalists. All the money goes to their pockets, period. And that is not what governance is about. It's putting the most services to us at the least cost to us and to make our lives better, not to enrich the rich and give power to the powerful and line their pockets. No, it's to grassroots, us. And it's a lie or gaslighting to say that conservative movements are grassroots. That is the farce and so laughable, it's unbelievable. So the other issue was, as we previously mentioned, we talked about their gun laws. We talked about how they want to reduce spending, and we know from historical data that even the Harper government set records for spending and cutting the revenues by selling off all the crown corporations he could. And that would only continue under a Poilievre government, and the lobbyists would win and their corporations win. But the other one that I wanted to talk about was lowering the cost of housing, the affordability of housing. Okay, we hear him talking. He talks about it, but not once has Poilievre or the Conservatives said, how would you reduce or make affordable housing? The last time they tried to make affordable housing was under Harper, where PP was a member of his party. They went to 40-year mortgages with zero down, facilitating one of the largest collapses in real estate in Canadian history, costing, as near as I can calculate, some $200 billion of taxpayers' money in guaranteed CMHC loans. And had not Carney come along and said, hey, don't foreclose on those loans, let them run out, or you'll crash the whole real estate market that had gone up 4 to 5 times as a result of this policy. The government of Harper never reduced the price of real estate when he could have. He could have allowed the market to crash and real estate drop down, but he made millionaires out of people that owned houses in Vancouver and Toronto and Quebec or whatever. So he made these people very wealthy off their real estate portfolios, and they never wanted to remove the housing asset value for many reasons. So how would this new party under Poilievre 2.0 make affordable housing? Are they going to increase the wages? They'd have to, wages would have to go up 4 to 5 times what they are now to make affordable housing. So is that his policy? He doesn't say. But because he's so closely associated with Harper, who is now running AIMCO in Alberta at a 1 point whatever billion dollar missing money scenario, I can see them coming back and saying, we'll do the 40-year mortgage or a 50-year mortgage. And that is to aid and make the banks rich, because you're paying the interest in advance of paying on the principal. So that would enrich the banks, and he would get favor of big corporations that provide mortgages. So is that his policy? And would that be beneficial again to Canada, or would it cause another collapse in the real estate market as was previous under Harper? You got any takes on the policy to lower housing costs?
Well, in their policy statement, they say they're going to build 2.3 million homes by axing the taxes to save $100,000 a home. Now, I can't imagine how there's $100,000 on a new home, but in any event, and to assist
actually, now let me, I might have just thought of something on that one. If you're claiming there's 100,000 in taxes, that might be taxes on the profits of the corporations that are going to build these homes. So you're going to lower the corporate tax to corporations that are going to inflate prices and gouge people to buy those houses. So yeah, I could see it now. I understand it now. It's a little gaslighting. They're going to lower the taxes on the corporations after they've profited at your expense.
Well, the question is, if the government's $100,000 comes off the construction of a new home, and the home that's beside the new home is worth $1 million, does that mean the new home is going to sell for 900,000? Of course not. Of course not. Now, he's also going to assist us by selling off federal land and getting gatekeepers out of the way to speed up building. So he's going to take rules away, that now control developments, and he's going to sell off federal land so that federal land will be gone. And of course, the final one is he's going to put Canada first. Now, where have we heard that slogan?
Yeah. No, I think it's put Canadians last and sell out to multi-international corporations, so we get it up the wazoo again. And I think that people have seen through this smoke and mirrors of the Harper government. And you got to remember, these people that are running Conservative Party are not the old progressive conservatives. Otherwise, Joe Clark would have stepped up and challenged for the leadership of the Conservative Party, and he would have got my vote for running the country. So we have a problem, folks, and it's called gaslighting and holding opposition leaders to accountability, like security clearance. What are your actual policies? Spell it out. What are you actually going to do? I mean, we've talked about it. We can get into quite a lot more detail, and we probably will do one on the housing and potential corrections to the problems from a unique perspective. We try to always add the meat of the matter and deal with the underlying systemic problems, and these issues are not going to go away unless you root out the real cause of the problems. And one of the causes is the corporate welfare and capitalists now controlling all levels of our politics in Canada, just like in the U.S. Now, I wanted to move on to the other issue, which is, what is Poilievre's position on these tariffs and the negotiations of NAFTA or CUSMA or whatever you want to call it? Because he talks like he's going to rally for Canada, but his actions don't speak that he would not sell us out. I mean, you look at the lobbyists, most of their connections are U.S. firms or U.S. ownership, or the lobbyists interests are dubious at best, and we have a potential prime minister who has championed Trump in the past, who sides with Smith in Alberta, ran to Alberta because he got knocked out of politics. He ran to his allies in Alberta who are backers of Trump and separatists to Canada to get back his power and be leader of the party. And they held the party leadership in Calgary, which is the conservative stronghold of Canada, Harper's old riding, to get influence and power back to the conservatives. What is he going to do to not sell us out to the Americans or Trump? And I don't see him having any negotiation ability in dealing with Trump. I think we would be net losers. He would give away all our assets and our crown corporations. All our mineral rights would be sold at a discount to appease Trump and his corporate overlords and lobbyists. And that would be a problem. So I think it's very important that we demand that the leader of the opposition put down his policies in writing and make it very clear and known to the Canadian voters what he's actually standing for, because all this rhetoric is getting very tiring, and this yelling and screaming like a banshee about, oh, everybody's doing it wrong, but I would do it better, and never putting anything forward. Reminds me of Trump yelling and screaming that he's got the best health care, Obamacare's the most ridiculous thing, and shit, we're still 10, 12 years down the road since he started being a banshee in the U.S., and he's never come up with anything better than Obamacare, and now he's cut it right out from under. Is that what Poilievre and the Conservatives are going to do to Canada? I say yeah, because they will not change from that policy of not disclosing their policies, which is hypocrisy. So we have to be very careful, and we have to be on guard. It's elbows up, folks. Get those elbows up. These people with allegiances to foreign influences need to be stopped. And I think the conservative movement has way too many ties to U.S. interests, and they're undermining Canada's sovereignty from within Canada. It's the enemy within Canada right now. And beware, folks. We have to have our eyes wide open, just like what happened in the U.S. under the Trump conservative movement. It can happen here and is happening here in Canada. So I want people to be aware that start asking questions, start commenting, start sharing, start telling your friends to subscribe, watch our channel too. We were duped by not knowing that the short videos we produce got lots of watch hours, but they didn't go towards monetization. We thought we were very close to monetization. We found out only our long videos. So we quit producing short videos, folks, so that you watch long videos. We're back up to our normal watch hours, but we've had to redo it. Now we're 6 months behind on monetization. With monetization, you'll get better podcasts from us and more research. We'll be hiring people to help us do that. So help us get monetized. You know, you can loop your video so it continues plays. You don't have to watch it, but you can loop it. Or you can go to our long video list and hit run the whole playlist. That will run up our watch hours, and we would be very thankful for you doing that, because it helps monetize us. We've got enough subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. But we do need the watch hours, because we were duped into not realizing their shorts were not counted towards monetization. So thank you for your help in that matter. Now back to the tariff policies. You got any ideas what Poilievre and the Conservatives would be doing? Would they be selling out the auto industry? Would they be selling our lumber out? Would they be...
I'm afraid he would be down on his knees begging. You know, because face it, if you can protect the 1 to 10%, you know, income earners in Canada, the rest of us really don't count that much. And the thing is, we don't go to paid dinners, the pay for play. We don't join the party and donate on a regular basis. So your voices aren't going to be heard unless you turn out and vote. And you should
Right.
really look at what the policies are. Like, it's all these catchphrases are great. I'm going to cut your taxes. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. How are you going to do that? Are you going to magically say, okay, instead of 10%, you're paying 9%? Great. Do I have to line up for another 20 hours in the hospital waiting room in order to get
Yeah.
a checkup? Or are there going to be more beds in the hospitals? Or are the trains going to run on time? Like, who knows? But what you do
Well, I
know is
do
the
know
most.
one thing, that corporate taxes will be lowered. They said
Yes.
they're gonna lower taxes, there will be corporate taxes lowered. And that's that trickle down economics of Reaganomics, and it doesn't trickle down, folks. You get the manure at the bottom of the pile and all the wealth goes to the top. And they get all the benefits and they get all the perks and quirks, and you aren't entitled to that. So, you gotta have your eyes wide open, is the old saying, and quit believing all this snake oil salesman crap that modeled off the U.S. Trump bullshit marketing.
The thing is, it does work.
Oh, it
I
works
mean,
great.
look at Trump. I mean, Trump promised the world, and all he's done
Yeah,
is make himself rich. And
oh,
people love him because he was quite honest about that. I'm going to steal from you. I'm going to become rich, and you're going to love it. And
yeah.
apparently, that's exactly what's happening.
They
It's
love being shot on the streets of Minnesota. They love blowing up fishermen in the open seas. They love the fact that they're going to have ICE blocking the voting polls in the next midterm elections. Whatever his name is, stated that in his podcast, that ICE is going to blockade all the voting polls to ensure that the election isn't stolen like in 2020. You should listen to that one. I've only heard excerpts of it because I was preparing for this episode, but I think we'll have to do one on that where they've actually stated the real reason ICE was formed and given these extreme powers and moved into major centers is to block people from actually turning up to the polls. And on top of that, Trump will offer $2,000 to all adults in the red states as part of his tariff refund. And he will bolster voting there, but I guarantee you there won't be ICE preventing voters from being able to cast their vote. So could that happen here in Canada with the conservative movement? Yes, because they're not clear and concise on their policies. And they model off of the U.S. propaganda and are affiliated with the Republican movement through religious affiliations down in the States. So, yes, folks, when you start promoting taking away women's rights, that's the first thing that happened to launch Trump and his Republicans, was taking away women's rights and then linking all their policies to religious beliefs. And that was the start of what happened in the U.S. And folks, it's starting here in Canada. It started to happen. You see a lot of religious groups promoting conservatism and taking away women's rights. And that's happening. It's not even a joke. And when you point it out to some of the religious fanatics, they get really pissed and upset because you've disclosed that they're what's really going on. So I think we need to open our eyes more, ask the hard questions, pay attention more, and part of that is commenting on our statements, because we may be right, we may be wrong, but we like to debate them. And calling us old farts that don't know anything is not a debate. We know we have wisdom with age, and we've been involved in a lot more business and legal issues than any of these so-called, Facebook or social media experts. We've been there. We've done it. We know what we're looking at when we see it. And I can tell you right now, you just make yourself look like a fool, because a lot of our subscribers know exactly who we are, and we're trying to talk in a level that the average person could understand. But if you want us to do it like a doctorate degree and start producing documents and facts, we could do that too. But
Corey,
it'll
are you
make
getting
for an
hate mail?
very boring podcast for you.
Are you getting hate mail? Is that why you're?
Oh, I've even had mail saying, "We hope you die." Well, I plan to be around doing this for 40 more years, folks. So get used to it. I'm just starting. Which reminds me, support our entertainment channel as well. Go to Patreon, which is in the description, where we're trying to implement entertainment. I mean, people's budgets are hurting so bad, they can't even afford entertainment, which is holding up our ability to provide comedy shows, to provide dances and bands, venues to portray their music at. And we do need your support. We're not anti-Canadian, we're Canadian, and we're promoting Canadian dance, which is something you might want to do a little research on, because guess who's the expert? Oh, where is it? Me. And I want to release this stuff, but I don't want to give it away, because it's important to me. I spent over $200,000 researching this stuff, not entitled to any grants, not getting any support from government to protect Canadian dance, which is a cultural component of our society. And I would like your guys' help in that matter. When I have a couple thousand subscribers on Patreon for our Supper Club events, I will start releasing the Canadian dance material, which will revolutionize Canada's dance industry and venues. So please support us. If I don't get that, oh well, I guess there's a bonfire. There's no interest in Canadian dance. So back to our great Poilievre. Anything we're missing?
I don't know. Apparently, Poilievre and Carney met in order to discuss various policy points, and of course, Poilievre agreed that he wasn't going to stand in the way of the government, which is what he has done in opposition. Object to everything. So it should be interesting to see what the two men could work together, which would be, I think, a positive thing. But it's like everything else. When you've got big egos involved, it's very difficult for one party to give all the credit to another. So it should be interesting to see what happens.
I think that was just a maneuver to try to stop another floor walker from crossing. He's saying, well, we'll work with you. And that's trying to prevent another conservative from crossing the floor. Now, there's a benefit to crossing the floor, conservatives, because if you're a true progressive conservative and not a reform conservative, which Poilievre and Harper are reform conservative, you would be working with Carney, who was hired by the conservatives to bail their sorry asses out after the real estate fiasco of 2008. And that would say more to your conservative grassroots base, and it would also help your riding. So I'm saying right now, right here, I want to see somebody or one or two of you stand up, walk across the floor as conservatives. I'm from conservative country, and there are some very, very good, strong contributors in the conservative movement that need to break their ties from this reform conservative Trumpist party and walk across the floor. We need you to stand up for Canada. We need a majority in the House to deal with Trump. A minority will not work against the influences of the U.S. They will divide and conquer with their money, and they will buy favors out of people like Poilievre and the conservatives. So we need you to stand up. This is my plea to all you conservative MPs across Canada. Please stand up. We are not affiliated with the Liberal Party, NDP Party, or Conservative. I voted for all parties in my history, and I want to see you look yourself in the mirror and say you want to stand for a strong Canada And that would mean walking across the floor. You can tell your voters in your riding that you will get more by participating in protecting Canada with jobs than by not crossing the floor and having a divided Canada. So that's what I want to see happen. This is my plea. And the benefits are very, very simple. Walking across the floor means you can negotiate to walk across the floor with Carney, who will help constituents in your riding. I mean, look at Poilievre's riding. He isn't going to run there again. And why? Because he said cutting a deal with China was a bad thing for Carney to do. Yet, lo and behold, more canola oil was sold as a result of cutting a deal with China. And guess who benefited? The majority of Poilievre's riding in Battle River benefited from that, and he publicly said it was a bad deal. So he did not stand up for the farmers in his riding who made the ability to sell their canola oil versus taking losses, huge financial losses on their crops. And being in Alberta, there's a lot of canola farmers in the Battle River riding. And now they have some reassurance that they won't go broke as farmers. So standing up for Canada means that a few of you MPs have to walk across the floor. It saves us money and time or a potential election at the worst possible time when negotiating CUMSA. I mean, can you imagine Poilievre overturning the government and we having to have an election while they're negotiating CUMSA? It would destroy Canada. It would give Trump all the ability to do whatever he wanted because we'd have a divided Canada. We cannot afford that, folks. We cannot afford the separatist movement out of Alberta at this time. It is a travesty to even allow it. And why Smith does not speak out against it is obvious. She is a Trump supporter, period. She went down to Trump begging, and she's lowered the differential between West Texas Intermediate and Western Select. Immediately after going down to Trump, the price gap widened so that we're not even getting fair return on our oil, and yet she wants to flood the market with our oil so that we use it all up faster by pipelines versus refining here in Alberta and shipping finished product around the world, which is the smart way to do business. And the Conservatives do not understand smart in business because crown corporations are the smart way to deal with finite resources. Look at Norway. And well, you've heard me argue that many times, but I am pleading with MPs, Conservatives. I mean, heck, even a Green could walk across the floor, or one of the MPs from Quebec could walk across the floor. But do it for Canada. Do it for your constituents, and do it to prevent Trump from invading Canada. United we stand, divided we fall. And that is what Trump wants, is to divide us, and then he could theoretically invade us real easy with his money. So we have to be careful what we do, and right now is the time to make a strong government. We need a majority government under the leadership of a banker who understands finance, economy, economics, and has done amazing things in the first year of his governance to block the U.S. from hostilely taking over Canada or hostilely taking over our resources. You like to add anything to my rant?
No.
Do you agree with it?
I think, well, yes, and no. I I really don't care if, the fringe wants to talk about separatism in Alberta. Who cares? I mean, look at who these people are. They're they pretend to be freedom fighters, but they have no idea about what they're talking about, in the sense that they think, okay, if the equalization payments are so many billion out of Alberta and so many billion into Alberta, and that's what it's all about. If it was sovereign, if Alberta was a sovereign country, how would it deal with the native population? How would it deal with the transportation from BC to Saskatchewan? How would it deal with the borders? Would it have its own border patrol? How would it deal with international affairs? These questions
How would it
aren't
deal
being.
with the need for employers to hire immigrant workers? Because now
Oh, that's a minor
Saskatchewan and
issue.
Quebec would
That's
be immigrant workers.
a minor issue. How would they deal with keeping deciding who was an Albertan and who wasn't? Like the
Wow.
issues and the 500 billion that they think the U.S. government is going to lend them. The interest on that alone will eat up the equalization payment that they're paying, that they're claiming is the issue. So the reality is the economics don't work, the politics don't work, but it sounds so good, right? We'll have an extra $13 billion. Who's going to get the $13 billion? Not not
They
the
lost
pigeons that.
they lost that in the last year on the money from lower oil prices. They lost over $14 billion at the current gap between fair market price and the low discount price they're giving our oil to the American companies right now. They lost over 14 billion just because of mismanagement of resources and assets, and I could probably increase that number quite a bit on other aspects of corporate welfare that the Alberta government's been doing. So it is bullshit when it comes down to it. The Alberta government is squandering our money, crying that it's going to Quebec, when in fact they're squandering more money by giving it to corporations, foreign entities, and lowballing our ability to generate revenue through crown corporations. So, they're only going to be worse. And they lost 1.2 billion in AIMCO of government employee pension funds. So these people couldn't manage a hot dog stand at a Flames game and make money at it. So I can't see the relevance of allowing this to continue to run the whole province as a country into the ground. I mean, they have a $6.5 billion deficit last year on giveaways and gifting our resources away. I mean, holy crap, folks.
See, you're
Open
talking
your
about
eyes.
you're talking about lost potential. In other words, what they could have got or should have
Yeah,
got. What I'm talking about is what they already have. So
yeah.
if they're looking at the deficit in the transfer payments, when that deficit disappears, which is the theory, that's what it's all about. So who gets that money? Who provides the services that the federal government is currently providing? So let's
Cost a fair
pretend,
penny.
but let's pretend that we've got $13 billion of extra cash from the resource industry. Is it going to go back to the shareholders of the oil and gas companies? Is it going to go to the CEOs of the oil and gas? Like
Most
where is that
likely.
money going to go? Because they're talking about reducing taxes, giving away government land, blah blah blah. So if that windfall were to go to Alberta, who in Alberta would get it? And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered before people have a grasp on what's going on. Look at Brexit
Uh,
in
oh
in
yeah, that was
Europe.
gaslighting in its finest by foreign influence. They even link it now to some of the Epstein files and the cabal of the Epstein files that were influencing governments around the world. So yeah, who's backing these separatists financially is my question. Where's the
And
money
the money's
coming
coming
from?
from somewhere.
Yeah, so who's benefiting? That's something that I think we need to start asking and holding people accountable.
Here's an example. Brexit has cost the UK economy, the GDP has been reduced by 8%. It shrunk.
Yeah.
Now, the
And
next
that's
question
probably
is
what would happen to Alberta too, because it's about the same size, isn't it?
when Quebec wanted to have their referendum, the armored trucks were heading to Toronto down the 401 with all the inventory from all the banks and
Yeah.
financial institutions. They gutted Montreal used to be the financial center of Canada. It's not anymore. Calgary is kind of the new financial center of Canada, and it won't be anymore. So
No, you can see the financial loss and the lack of money right now, and it's very obvious in Calgary, and you can see the higher unemployment, and housing prices have been dropping here for due reason. There's nobody able to get work or pay the mortgages. So you can see it happening here, and it's getting worse. So yeah, Alberta is not the place to invest. The instability of this separatist movement has moved investment dollars away, and it's very obvious. You can see that as a fact. It's even affecting Saskatchewan, where Saskatoon now has the highest vacancy for business offices, and that's a beautiful city, and it's being affected negatively and then by investments, just like Alberta. So this is bad governance, bad policy. You do not allow undermining of your economy, even as a province, by a fringe element that are radical, and that's what's being allowed. This is why the recall of Smith petition is important, because it holds her to accountability. Even though Medicine Hat has gained nothing from her in power, they're still willing to support her blindly. So that's a problem in Alberta, is blind following of morons, and that's happened for a long time here, when we should be sending our brightest and most intelligent people with solutions to the problems that are systemic in Alberta. I mean, all Smith's doing is saying, hey, I want total control over who's going to be our judges in the province so I can influence how they're going to rule on cases. Okay, we'll get into that one in another episode, but that's a reality of what's going on.
Talk to you later.
Okay, take care, comment, share, like, subscribe. You can donate to us at Patreon to help us finance expanding our entertainment industry. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.